Hey, everybody. Welcome to Thinking Out Loud, episode 2. Today's guest is a lifelong friend of mine, Lena Purnell. Elena is a 20-year veteran nurse in New York City. She's currently working as an ER charge nurse in Brooklyn on the front lines of the COVID-19 global pandemic. I wanted to bring her on as a trusted voice to give us a window into what's taking place on the front lines against this clear and present danger. So I wanted to bring you on, like I shared, before, to kind of talk about your journey. Right. I think all of us right now are, trying to see clear through the forest, and we hear more than anything, the people on the front line and what their needs are and what they're going through.
I mean, just a little bit about me.
Right.
I've been a nurse almost 20 years.
Wow.
And a registered nurse. And I have worked half of that time in the emergency room here somewhere in New York City, is sort of like ground zero again.
Yeah, very much so.
For when this virus hit. So I'll start by saying that. And I want to further add that anything that I say here is just based off of my own opinions, and they're not I'm not soliciting medical advice,
sure,
or anything like that. Just that, these are my observations and opinions,
right?
And so I just want to put that out there.
With 20 years of experience,
with that type of experience,
yeah,
right?
Indeed.
One of the things about my ER is that I think it has space to see and treat. Maybe we have like a 75-bed unit.
Mm.
So if we were to see 1 or 2 people a day, annually that number would be around 30,000 patients. If we saw like 1 or 2 people a day. But the ER I work in can see over 100,000 patients annually.
Wow.
So that's a large amount of people that come through there, just to give you an idea what the volume can be like. And that is just on a regular day.
Right.
We're not talking about the onset of a pandemic. And watching that unfold will give you some idea of how big those numbers probably really got over.
Now, did it just hit all at once? Was it gradual? When did you know, oh shit, this is really serious? When was the turning point?
I have to say, Hans, it really just it just hit, boom.
Wow.
It was one day, I think we were getting patients that were really sick. There was a lot of respiratory distress. These are patients that have their asthma kick up, or the flu was the height of flu season. So we're talking December, January. Those numbers were bigger than they usually would have been. Flu-like symptoms.
Got it.
I'm talking. So, and it could have just been your garden variety flu, but somewhere in and around the end of February, things just went. They just exploded.
Wow.
So I will give you an example of what I mean. I was charge nurse, and I think we were getting from the CDC that this virus is on its way. The numbers are increasing, and the recommendations for how to deal with that was changing by the hour, moment to moment.
Wow.
So I was really at the beginning of a situation where we didn't really know and understand just how big it was going to be, what it was going to do, and what it was going to look like. And so when I was charge nurse that one day, I had 4 patients come in whom in respiratory distress, one after the other, and it went like that all day. And we had to protect ourselves and try to. What we do sometimes is, I don't know if you're familiar with the term intubation, which is where we set these patients up on mechanical ventilation so that they're able to breathe.
Right. Assisted.
Right. Assisted breathing. And I did that for 4 patients in a row. And trying to do that while protecting yourself and your staff, to give you an idea what kind of stress that is, it's like nothing I ever experienced in my life. And that was the sequence of events for the course of that day. I think in total, there were maybe 7 patients that day. By the following day, that number doubled, and it continued to trend upward in terms of those types of patients that we needed to help us. Right. But you have to understand, this is the very beginning of this crisis. And so we were doing what we were accustomed to do to assist these patients and to help them. And like I said, the recommendations were changing by the moment.
Day.
Yeah.
I think they were trying to understand, I mean, we all are and still are, every day you see like stuff online about what new symptoms there are and just kind of how people are reacting to the virus differently. So I wanted to, go back to the protective gear because you hear on TV PPE constantly. What is normal PPE? Like if outside of a pandemic, right? Like,
so normal PPE, which is personal protective equipment, is what you would use anytime there's some sort of infectious like process or disease that you want to protect yourself and other people from. So in a normal situation, that there are different types of recommendations for like how we touch people and deal with them. So you have like universal precautions, which is just where you wear your gloves, you wash your hands. But for something and different types of viruses and or bacteria or funguses, they do different things. So some of them are transmitted like in your respiratory, what we call droplet. If you like cough or sneeze, those bacteria can be transmitted in that way. And so you have to have the types of equipment that can help you filter away those droplets and keep them from, sticking to you. So that you don't inhale it yourself and then contract it or pass it along, on something that may be on you or in your hands or anything like that. So PPE is equipment that's designed to like protect you from that. Typically, there's also like what we call contact precautions. And we're like out saying too much because I don't want to like,
scare anybody.
Well, I just try to speak in a way that people can understand it if they, questions about it. But sometimes it's just like a gown and you put a gown on and gloves, you wash your hands before and after.
So there's nothing to the likes of what you see with people.
Well, no, there are other things like tuberculosis is a type of disease that you want to have. That's also
requires that.
Yeah. I think it's droplet. And you have to have the particular mask.
And that is if somebody comes in and they have a history of TB or
sometimes you want to isolate them and you want to protect yourself and anyone that might want to go and see that patient, they have to have that type of equipment.
Got it.
So I think the issue became you're needing to switch out your equipment. And anytime you needed to, like when you're done, you wash up, you take off the PPE and, you move on. The issue became we had such an increased amount. And I think a lot of nurses and hospitals were struggling with this, that the stash for PPE was running low.
Got it.
So that's been something that continues to be an issue. I just wanted to highlight that other hospitals are also struggling with that. I'm not sure. I would have to look it up. I started to do that last night, and of course, some child interrupted me, and it went right out my head. But there are some recommendations, I think, for how to reuse PPE. And I don't want to misspeak, but maybe on the CDC. As we talk more, I'm going to look and see if they have some studies there that support how hospitals are now reusing PPE and things like that. Not so much where I'm at, but I know that my brother is also a nurse. And so
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
gotta reach out to him, man. Send him
yeah,
me. We talk on Instagram a lot, but
yeah. Ephraim is also a nurse.
I
What's
love
so
that.
funny? It's so great. Let me tell you, because that the day I described, I had to call Ephraim. Like, I FaceTimed him really quick as I was sitting down at the desk, because I was like, I am not going to get through this. So I'm like, I FaceTime him
Wow.
just as I'm just trying to catch a breath. And he pops up on the screen, and it's so weird because I'm in scrubs, he's in scrubs. And I just shake my head. And he's like, hey, name of the game is hold on, the reinforcements show up. That's what you're doing. Like, he describes this whole situation almost like it was, like being in a war zone. And
Right.
the volume was up a little bit.
Right.
And I remember he said some words of encouragement, got my mind right, said, are you okay? I said, yes, I'm okay. He said, all right, then call me when you get off. I said, all right. We hang up. And the whole nurses station were like, oh my God, we love him. Who is that? Is that him? I'm like, that's my brother. I'm like, he's amazing. Tell him we said thanks. So everybody
Wow.
needed to hear,
Wow.
those words of
Needed that
encouragement.
encouragement.
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
And you told me that you triaged 80 people in one day. Was that the peak of it, you believe? Or
it felt like about 80.
Right.
Yeah. We had, so what we decided to do was, if patients came in and they met a certain criteria, then we had a COVID unit. Now, you might see this on the news at the time, a lot of, and even still now, probably,
Sure.
you'll see like tents outside for people who have very minor symptoms. And the idea was to kind of deal with the volume in a way that we could see those patients, make recommendations for them. If it's serious, then they would move on to a different part of the ER. But if it's something that they could manage at home, we would give them instructions and discharge them home if it was appropriate to do. But, there's a lot of fear surrounding situations like this, and rightly so. And, people would come in and they would just have fever, but it may not have been COVID. So the system was getting overwhelmed. But then there was a large portion of people who probably that ended up getting testing, nowhere near to the tune of 80 for that day. But the volume of people that came in were just like all shortness of breath or fever or cough or sent by urgent care to be evaluated. And it was a lot. It was a lot.
Do they send you guys the models? Because, you hear Dr. Fauci speak about the models, which are based on, I think 20% of the population is going to get it, or 80%, something like that.
When you're in real time, you're not getting a model that day.
Got it.
Nobody is going to give you we have a criteria that we're working from how this thing is unfolding. And that's the thing about when
the real data, the hard data, not the presumption.
That takes time. That hard data takes time to reach you when you're on the front lines, because you're really doing real time triaging, and that's a military term, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And it's no, it is. It's like you putting a dot on the guy that's going to be okay, and red dot, green dot, black dot.
Wow.
So you're in that type of. It's a kind of framework where, for me, and I'm speaking to my own experiences, it's the kind of framework where you are right at the precipice of it. So you're the person that's putting the finger in the dike, and whoever's doing this data, they're going to do it. But you got to hold pressure until we get it done. So who's holding the pressure? Right. So those types of recommendations came much later than, in my opinion, than when it first hit. And so my experience with COVID certainly was the first 2 to 3 weeks of it.
And then you caught it yourself, you believe? I
believe I did, yes.
Wow.
So right before it peaked, I was weak. I had some shortness of breath that was significant. And I said, listen, I don't feel well. And I'm like, well, I think I should get tested. At the time, you and I spoke about this. The testing criteria was much different than it is now. They didn't have enough tests. There were lots of things that were made this very convoluted. And I didn't have fever, but I had all these other symptoms. And so I went home and I quarantined myself for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that was really hard to do when you have two little bouncing boys running around.
Right.
And, I had chest x-ray done. I went to urgent care just to
right.
And then, I'm a nurse, so I kind of like work on myself at home.
Sure.
So there are things, that you do, try to keep yourself hydrated, and you just all the things that you do like that are like primary,
right.
Healthcare.
And I know at the time they were, like you said, criteria for testing. I read that they were only testing people that required different treatment or the change in, treating. I think
it was like
symptoms.
Fever, cough. I can't remember. There was a third piece to that puzzle that escapes me, but I didn't have fever, though I did have exposure. But there were a lot of people who had exposure that we didn't test. They were like, I could triage a guy who was his friend of a friend tested positive, and he was hanging out with the friend of a friend, and they were like, well, do you have symptoms?
Right.
If you don't have symptoms, you're not going to get tested.
Right. Because I saw a lot of nurses telling people to stay home, for common issues, right? Like,
so this is a person that would fit into that, branch of people who would probably, but he's like a friend of a friend who doesn't have symptoms, but is worried that he might have it. Those people also came to the ER. And again, I'm just speaking to the flow of what happens in emergency nursing and what that picture looks like. So you'll have people that come and want to be tested just because they know someone who has it. I wanted to talk a little bit about what these nurses that have done this work, what they might be experiencing. There's a lot that happens when you have so many critical care patients that you are trying to care for.
Wow.
And when you have like one maybe not doing so good, and then another not doing so good, and then a third not doing so good, that can have, and you're giving all this effort. If you lose one, there can be a lot of things that happen to the nurses, like emotionally. You know what I mean? It's really taxing on you to fight so hard for somebody. And you look at people and I think, this is my opinion, the nurses I work with, they don't look at you and see, just you. They look at you and be like, oh, well, that's somebody's dad or somebody's daughter or,
Right.
So you can do this job and not exactly be a compassionate person, but my experience is that most of the nurses that I work with and am proud to work with also have that level of compassion when they, lose a patient. It is impactful for them.
Wow.
So,
wow. The emotional effect.
Right. Sometimes there's a little bit of hopelessness. You're like, what am I doing if it's not helping?
Right.
And that's hard. That's hard. And so I hope people, I feel like they do though. I think people understand.
Yeah.
At 7:00, there are cowbells and claps out here every night at 7:00 in this neighborhood. You can hear people ringing bells for emergency workers.
That's amazing.
So it is. Now,
speak to the other side. You mentioned that there was people were distancing themselves from you as you're like walking the street.
That was a shock. I think. Well, I have neighbors, and neighbors know who I am, and I think some of them, which was an interesting phenomenon. And I've also seen a little bit of this on like social media where there's like this overwhelming concern that nurses are the problem. And I think I said to you,
oh, wow.
Well, the problem, like the nurses are out.
Are spreading it back in the community.
And it's like, well, the problem isn't that. It's in the community, and it came into the hospital where we are and happen to work. But I think that it's the job that we have to do.
Sure.
And that's just that. But I also think that, just seeing a person sort of move away, it really, I didn't expect to feel like, oh no.
Right. Is it me? Right.
Right, right, exactly. I was like, wait a minute, right? You're
Right,
like,
right,
am I
yeah.
short?
Yeah.
Right? You know, raise your hand if you're short. I was like, oh no,
Right.
and I say that jokingly, but I think that's also a real thing that can
I mean,
happen.
I
But
think that's for all of us, like even
yeah,
out here, if I leave my building and I see
right,
somebody without a mask or something, and
right. You
I'm,
kind of like, whoa
yeah,
now.
like I'm doing a B or a V line or
Right,
whatever.
right. But there was some part of this that felt a little more personal to me, and it escapes me why. But
Right.
but I also see like really great things where a nurse is just putting on her backpack and heading out the door, and all her neighbors are
Yeah, I
outside
saw a
clapping.
video.
Did you
Yeah,
see
that
that?
was amazing. Yeah. I
Yeah, that was
mean,
pretty dope. And so these are the times we live in, and this is what this looks like right now. So
right. I mean, it is a war, and you guys are truly on the front line. And,
yeah.
I can't say that I would be so courageous, to be honest, to put myself in like
It's
harm's
not
way.
easy. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I'm headed back, and that's been hard to think about.
Got it.
It's hard to think about it, but I try to ready myself as much as I can. I just want to be careful. My brother is also working
Sure.
in the COVID unit where he's employed.
In Philly.
So,
Yeah.
right. And so, we have some talks, once in a while about, what we need to do to keep safe. And
It's not that bad in Philly yet, they're saying.
Yeah.
It's
I don't think
gonna,
it'll get as bad as what happened here. Remember, when this first hit, we had 50% of the new cases in the
America.
country
Wow.
were in New York City. So that it was just unprecedented. And I don't know, I think maybe New Jersey might be following us.
Sure.
I don't know that that number will be as big for other states. I will say though, this rush to reopen states might impact that
Right.
tremendously. I don't know.
I think a part of their push is that we have the facility to handle it. Now, aside from the ventilators, do we have the manpower? Because I think that's really, when you speak about nurses being on the front line, it's not just the machines, it's just the ability to care for, an enormous amount of patients at once. Where
Right.
that, how do you feel? I mean, to your point, like if we rush back in, could we handle another wave per se?
It's hard to say. Manpower is going to always be an issue. It's an issue on a regular day.
On a regular day.
I mean, you can look back over the last 5 years and look at reports from like any nursing organization, and they probably have done at least 1 or 2 articles about the nursing shortage. And we've been having that sort of song. We've been singing that sort of song for a while, for a long time. So there's a real, clear understanding that, staffing will be an issue. I don't know. I think you got to pull your resources, to where you need them. But I feel like, do we have the manpower to handle it? That's a complicated question. There are a lot of factors that
Sure.
for me, I think, can change what that picture looks like. So,
right.
I don't know.
And what
the
do you?
short answer is I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and that's honest. I know in Italy, a lot of doctors from Cuba went out to kind of help them out.
Right.
And I think even in the U.S., we've seen retired nurses come back
out. Yeah. And, we've seen people that, come from areas that, sort of have things under control and go to areas like, lots of nurses travel into New York to help. So I've been seeing a lot of that, and that
from different cities where it's not so bad.
Yeah, where they kind of have a handle on what they're doing, and they can travel to help out.
Any like advice for people who may be having symptoms, per se, like, or is that advisable? Or do you not want to do?
No, you know what I want to say? I want to say,
sure.
Like, just keep yourselves healthy. I'm a big believer in taking my vitamins, my vitamin D, my vitamin C. I take a little elderberry. I think it helped me. That's my opinion.
Right.
But I think having, get your vitamins going. Make sure you're eating a really healthy diet, that can just help drive that immune system up, because
Sure.
that's what you need. Hand washing, like all that stuff is real. Like,
Right.
cover your face when you go out. If you got to go out, just go out for essentials. If you need gloves, wear gloves. If you got to touch things, you come in, you wash your hands, you wipe down your products, and you keep yourself safe in that way. Keep a safe distance. Those are the things that I really believe in, and I think have helped keep my family.
We've known each other since 1985.
Right. Come on with that. Don't do that.
I gotta put a year on that. Like,
and don't you do it. I'm holding up good.
Nah, you don't look a day, you look the same. You don't look no different. So, I don't know too many people outside of my family from that long ago. To be outside of my blood family. So,
well, we're like family. Like, we grew up together. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted
definitely.
to, on a personal level, I wanted to speak to a trusted voice, and, I want people to know.
Well, I hope that I was able to convey,
Sure.
I hope we accomplished what you set out to accomplish.
No, we did. You're good. It's again, it don't have to be a TED talk, it's just.
No,
it's just, it's got to be some takeaways that people can use. And just hearing, what I've learned is when people hear your voice, right? Like, you're in the eye of the storm, right? Like, you're in the midst of this, and you're not, your voice speaks to a sense of, I have this under control, as much as I can, like, you're not hysterical and like, losing your mind. Does it help? It does. It helps to ease.
Being hysterical
doesn't help.
Never helps.
Right.
Being hysterical doesn't help. If that's like the first rule you learn as an emergency room nurse, hey, don't get hysterical. It's not going to help.
Right.
Anything, if somebody is in distress, anything you do to help them is a help. And that's a way to manage how you deal with feeling like that. So, it doesn't help us to get hysterical. What we have to do is be smart and just try to stay calm and ride through it the best way we can. That's it. There's nothing else to do.
Well, thank you for your service. You are
Thank
you
you so much for having me.
Yeah, man. I will
this
have
has
you
been
back.
Fantastic. Please.
You enjoyed this?
Call me anytime. This was cool. This was cool. I think it's a hit. I'm going to let you know.
I'm receiving that. All right, my sister. We'll talk soon. All right.
We will. Love you and
Love
be
you
well.
Too.